Good morning, Trinity family. Sorry for the slightly late start. We had some technical difficulties today. Just a reminder we cannot see everyone as we used to be able to, as Facebook is continually updating and changing their live format. So if you want to go ahead and say hello, let us know that you are here. That would be great. So as we are diving into, or I guess I should say, as we are continuing this journey through Holy Week, we're going to be looking at Luke 19 today. So if you want to go ahead, if you have a Bible already in front of you, go ahead and turn to Luke 19. Or if you want to open up a new tab or pull up the Bible app, we'll be at Luke 19 today. And as I just kind of mentioned, we cannot see everyone who's logging in anymore. So if you just want to say hello, let us know you are here. Feel free to keep commenting as we are going about. But I'd also like to know, what are some of your favorite Easter traditions? So you were growing up, now that you're an adult, while you were in college, while you started working. So what are some things you loved to do around the Easter season that kept Easter special? So hello, Wendy. Welcome back. We love seeing you. Linda, good morning. So again, drop us a note, say hello so that we can see who is here, as well as good morning, Deb, as well as let us know what are your favorite Easter traditions, or maybe you want to say maybe some of your Easter memories. So before we jump into Luke 19, for me, it was always growing up, we'd go to my grandma and grandpa Brimner's house, and we would have an Easter egg hunt for all the grandkids. They'd have our initials on our eggs, so everyone would get an equal amount of eggs, regardless of age. And while we were there, one of our uncles always had the task of hiding the eggs, which seemed like a great idea. But if you know any of the Brimners of that generation, you realize there's kind of a witty, clever streak that runs through the DNA. And every year, a few eggs would go unfound. And they'd ask the hider, and the hider's like, I hid 50 eggs. I don't remember where those are. So recently, this house was on the corner of Hudson and University. There's now a park or a open grass area there. I would not be surprised if during construction a few Easter eggs were found. But what about you guys? What were some of your favorite Easter traditions? And I guess a follow-up question, are you going to adjust those to work during quarantine if it was something that resolved or involved going outside your doors? So again, say hi, let us know you're watching, and let us know your favorite Easter traditions. And a final note before we jump into our passage today, we will be having a Good Friday service this Friday at 6:30, and we will be having a Easter service Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. I've kind of gotten a peek into some of the stuff those will involve, and I'm pretty excited about it, as well as the opportunity for you to take your phones, hold your phone up here and say, "He is risen indeed!" We need those by today. So if you guys want to participate in the He is Risen Indeed digital party, I guess we could call it, get those recordings in, get them sent to office at cedarfallstrinity.org, and we would love to get those connected for you. Good morning, Marty. Mark and Sydney, welcome back. Mary, welcome back. Denise, is that Dee Dee? I think that's Dee Dee. Awesome, we have Dee Dee with us. This is great. So everyone, welcome back to another morning meditation. We're going to be looking at the Triumphal Entry and some of the stuff that goes on around that, the immediate following. After my morning meditation Monday, I talked about the thieves at the cross, that's called to be the second thief, the one who recognizes his fallen state, confesses his sin, and is promised paradise with Christ. That kind of got me thinking some more about what were people expecting of Jesus come the cross? What were people expecting to see when the cross happened? Well, first off, they weren't expecting that at all, right? They were expecting Jesus to be this conquering king, to overthrow the Roman rule. They were expecting Jesus to, take a sword or maybe make a whip or whatever it may be. It might have been foreshadowing, spoiler alert there. But kind of this question of what were people expecting, and then what did they get? So in Luke 19, we're going to be looking at verses 29 through 44. A lot of us are familiar with the Triumphal Entry, which is great. It's an amazing passage that we should know. But one of the problems with familiarity is we forget minor details, or we overlook minor details. And so often when I picture the triumphal entry, I picture Jesus riding into town on a donkey, everyone super excited, waving, shouting Hosanna, throwing coats and palm branches and all this stuff on the road. And then Jesus doing like his best parade or princess wave. One of these guys kind of smiling at the crowd, people throwing candy out behind him, like your traditional parade, right? But that's not at all what we get when we actually dive in and start looking at this passage. So Luke 19, I actually want us to go ahead and we'll start a bit later on. We'll start in verse 36. It starts with Jesus sending his disciples to get a colt. They're literally just like stealing this colt. He's like, hey, go in, find this colt, take it. If anyone asks questions, tell them the Lord needs it. So then it becomes like not stealing anymore, I guess, because they say, okay, take it. So they end up, they're grabbing this colt. The owner comes out and is like, hey, what are you guys doing? Like, oh, the Lord needs it. He's like, oh, well, in that case, if the Lord needs it, be on your way. So he grabs the colt. He takes off as fast as a colt can go, which I'm guessing is not very fast. And he's coming in. It says his disciples are around him. They're laying their coats in front of him as he's coming over. And in verse 36, as Jesus was going, they were spreading their coats on the ground. As soon as he was approaching, near the descent of the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of the disciples began to praise God joyfully with a loud voice for all the miracles which they had seen, shouting, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest." Now this makes sense. This is your traditional parade picture, right? You can see this happening at Sturgis Falls. And it says, some of the Pharisees in the crowd came and said, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." But Jesus answered, "I tell you, if these become silent, the stones will cry out." Now, first off, part of me wishes the disciples would have then gotten silent so that the stones would have started crying out, because that'd be pretty great. How are we going to be like, this guy's a false messiah, when like the rocks themselves are singing his praise? That would have been a great testimony, but God prefers our praise over the praise of rocks. I would agree. Rocks are just rocks, right? Don't tell geologists I said that. But then it says in verse 41, this is where I'm like, oh, that happened? I tend to forget these verses. In verse 41, it says, when he approached Jerusalem, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, "If you had known in this day, even you, the things which make for peace, but now they have been hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon when your enemies will throw up a barricade against you, and surround you and hem you in on every side, and they will level you to the ground, and children within you, and they will not leave in you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation." For some reason, I always forget this part of the story. I forget Jesus approaching Jerusalem and weeping. And it wasn't like a single tear trickled down his cheek. No, it says Jesus wept over the city of Jerusalem. And he's saying, like, had you have known, like, you'll be destroyed. And we're not talking like, a lot of people mention, a lot of the Bible stories, they give numbers like, well, those are the men because that's how they charted things. Like, he's like, even the children will be destroyed. This is an all-inclusive destruction of the city of Jerusalem. And Jesus is just weeping over it. There's this compassion that just fills him as he sees the downfall that will be coming as they lacked the opportunity to embrace him when he visited. And so, we remember a lot of that. We remember the donkey. We remember the praise. A lot of us even remember him rebuking the Pharisees, but we often forget the sorrow and the compassion that overflows out of Jesus at that point. And as he's crying over the city, I'm just going to continue on here in verse 45. It says, Jesus enters the temple and began to drive out those who were selling, saying to them, "It is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a robber's den." And he was teaching daily in the temple. But the chief priests and the scribes and the leading men among the people were trying to destroy him. They could not find anything that they might do, for all the people were hanging on every word he said. So as we've studied the scriptures, as we've read the Gospels, we often see Jesus goes to a city, he goes to the temple, he goes to wherever their place of worship there is. He goes to their places of gathering, like the wells. And he begins to teach. He begins to preach truth. So in this instance, he's going to Jerusalem, so naturally he'll go to the temple within Jerusalem. And he arrives and he sees people are selling. So this is the Passover. People need certain things to do specific rituals. And so wise people are like, you know what? Someone needs a dove. Let's sell them a dove. So they're starting to profit off of people's religion. They're starting to profit off of this Mosaic sacrificial system that has been in place. And Jesus is not having it. It says Jesus entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling, saying to them, "It is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a robber's den." So I kind of started looking into this. A lot of people believe he was in what was called the court of the Gentiles. So the way the temple was made, Jews could go to a lot of areas, but then there were either some areas where only the priests could go, but the outer courtyard, anyone could go there. And so Judaism was supposed to reach the nations. It was called to reach all those around it. And so there was a part of the temple for the nations, for the people who came to embrace Judaism who were not themselves Jews. But that place where they could worship had essentially become a market, selling goods and sacrificial items to those who would need them. And Jesus, of course, being God, was very missional. He wanted to reach the nations. He was not happy that not only were these people not allowed to worship, but that it had became a corrupt marketplace to a degree. But even then, the way this story is told, it sounds kind of tame. It's like Jesus drove them out. You can picture him yelling, flipping a table or two. But if we look at Matthew 21, it's the same story. In Matthew 21:12, it says, Jesus entered the temple courts and drove out all who are buying and selling. He overturned the tables, the money changers, the benches of those selling doves. It is written, he said to them, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers. So we get a bit better of a picture of him flipping all of these tables, not just the ones with the doves, also the money changers. He's forcing everybody out of the temple. And again, this is like Holy Week. This is during the Passover, which I believe Peter will be telling us a bit more about tomorrow in that morning meditation. But as Jesus is like doing these things, it's just like, I can understand how people would be upset. Like, if I'm a Pharisee and I'm like, all right, I need to get to the temple, I need to buy my dove, I need to get it sacrificed, but some madman is flipping the tables over. I'm not a dove farmer. Where am I supposed to get this dove? Like, you can start to see where they're starting to be kind of upset with this Jesus guy because they don't understand his visitation. We have that weeping as he entered Jerusalem. Their ignorance has become their deficit. He's not like, oh, they don't know, they're okay. He's like, no, you will be destroyed. Not a stone will rest upon a stone. So we're going to look at this in a bit more detail. Let's jump to Mark. Before we jump to Mark, just a reminder, say hi. Let us know you're here in the comments. I'm just curious, what are some Easter memories you guys have here? Veronica mentions family get-togethers with a great ham dinner. I loved family get-togethers with oh man, my grandma could cook, I'll tell you what. Dressing hats and gloves. We need to bring back Easter best. Am I right? Like, I might wear my suit Sunday. We'll see. I feel like that needs to become a thing again. That was great. Growing up, attending church as a family, having Easter dinner with the grandma or two in attendance. The grandmas were gone before I was born. Oh, that's unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear that. We always had Easter egg hunt, and I remember finding melted chocolate eggs in the summer under the piano. That is great. Yeah, if you don't find them all, you'll find them eventually, hopefully, and nothing's better than year-old melted Easter eggs. Am I right? Family of all girls. You had special gloves, hats, yep, referencing the deity thing there, purses and shoes, and a new Easter dress, of course. Let's see here, jelly beans in church with the family, a new dress and gloves. New dress this year, but it'll have the gloves, of course. Latex gloves, that's pretty great. Latex gloves, I love it. So again, let us know, what are your Easter traditions? So let's jump back here into Mark. So in Mark, it's this exact same story. So it says, they came to Jerusalem. He entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. He would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. And the chief priests and the scribes heard it, and they were seeking a way to destroy him. For they feared him, because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. And when evening came, they went out of the city. They being the chief teachers and priests and the scribes. So with this one, we get a bit more of the detail, right? So you have, again, Jesus coming in, flipping the tables of the sellers, the pigeons, but then it goes a bit further and says he would not let anyone carry what they had bought. So imagine you come here, you buy a pigeon, and Jesus just comes over and like, oh, I got my pigeon, and he's like, no, and just knocks it out of your hand, right? Just this idea that, like, he is livid. About a year or so ago, Peter did a sermon where he mentioned these holy discontents. So this would have been a holy discontent for Christ, right? He's like, no, you will not turn my Father's house of prayer to the nations into a den of robbers or a den of thieves. And there he's even referencing an Old Testament prophecy that those buying and selling, the chief priests, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they would have known. They'd been like, oh yeah, that's this passage, and we need to get rid of this guy. And so they're seeking a way to destroy him. And again, if we reflect back on Monday where it says, Father, forgive them, they know not what they are doing. Again, they're working out of ignorance. They do not understand that they are plotting to kill God. The person they have been waiting their entire life for is there in front of them, and they're totally missing it. And so you see here, Jesus isn't letting people get the goods they bought out the door. He's not letting them get them to the sacrifice. He wouldn't let people carry things to the temple. And the temple is probably pretty full. This is Holy Week for them as well. And so it's probably a pretty full temple. It's mass chaos. So then I was like, well, let's see what John has to say about this. So a brief aside, the book of John also has a story of Jesus clearing the temple, but there are some minor differences in it, and it takes place at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. So I started doing some research. There are two lines of thought. Line one is it's the same story. John just front-loaded it at the beginning of his gospel, so it's kind of a foreshadowing. So you see what's going to happen, and then you do the rest of the journey, and then the rest of the crucifixion takes place. The other idea, which I kind of personally like, the poetry, the similarities, I guess, the symmetry that you see here, they say he maybe did this twice. So at the start of his ministry, he clears the temple. Then at the end of his ministry, he comes back and he's like, didn't I clear this place like 3 years ago? What's going on? And he goes into a new holy discontent and once again clears the temple. I like that idea. I don't know if it matters which one really happens. Regardless, Jesus clears the temple. He wants it to be a place of worship, not a den of robbers. But one thing I love in the John story, he comes in, he sees what's happening, he's like, oh, no, you didn't. He then leaves. He doesn't flip the tables yet. He leaves. He makes a whip, and then he comes back, and then he clears the table. So if you guys are looking for a fun, faith-based activity for your kids or your grandkids or quarantine, make some whips, set up some tables, and then just let them go crazy. Let them flip the tables, whip some things, take some video. I would love to see that. I might tell Pastor Trent, new idea. He's been releasing these videos with weekly kids' ideas. That should be one, as long as they are not my kids. But I think that'd be great to see. So these people are not happy campers. Now imagine, so a lot of these Pharisees, these chief priests, these scribes, they have dedicated their life to following 613 rules. Now, I don't know about you guys. I struggle with, like, the speed limit, and that's one rule, right? 613 rules, that's like a whole nother story. So, like, imagine you've dedicated your life following these 613 rules, and now this guy comes along and he's like, yeah, you missed it. You missed the mark. Your entire life of devotion, you're off base. You did not successfully follow the commands. You did not successfully wait for the Messiah. I'm here in front of you and you missed me. Like, that would be devastating, right? So we don't know if they're acting out of a revenge now, if they're upset and angry with God, or if they still think Jesus is some sort of a false Messiah. Regardless, they're like, we need to get this guy out of here. And, like, brief aside, like, don't hear me say, like, oh yeah, these guys are totally innocent. And, like, Jesus was baptized, and, like, the sky opened up, a dove descended on him, and the voice of God boomed out, and was like, this is my son with whom I'm well pleased. How could you miss that? Like, I feel like that's a given. When a guy's baptized and a dove lands on him and the voice of God booms out saying, this is my son, like, that first century, they don't have, like, Bluetooth speakers, right? That you can't fake that. There's no special effects. That is clearly God in action. But we can kind of see that, okay, so they're trying to make this trap. They're trying to figure out how do we get rid of this Jesus guy, this guy who doesn't value my entire life of devotion. And so in Luke 20, it goes on and it says, on one of the days, while Jesus was teaching the people in the temple, and preaching the gospel, the chief priests and the scribes with the elders confronted him. And they said to him, tell us, by what authority are you doing these things? Or who is the one who gives you authority? Jesus answered and said to them, I'll ask you a question, and you can answer me. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from men? Now, this is one of my favorite Jesus interactions. This is just Jesus setting them up for failure. This is him being get ready to have another drop the mic burn moment. So they reasoned among themselves. There's some internal discussion and debate. And they say, if we say it was from heaven, he will say, why did you not believe him? But if we say it's from men, all the people will stone us to death. We will be killed, for they are convinced that John was a prophet. So they answered, we don't know where it came from. Now, I find this fascinating. They accept everybody else except them believes John was a prophet. But there's this idea, C.S. Lewis has this term, chronological snobbery, where we're oh, the people in the good old days, they weren't as intelligent as we are. There's almost a similar thing here where it's an educational snobbery, where they're well, these laity, these fishermen and tax collectors think John was a prophet and think Jesus is God, but we know better because we follow rules. But they're not willing to take that risk. And so then Jesus responds, okay, nor will I tell you what authority I do these things. If you don't know that, you don't deserve to know this. That's just another great, Jesus mic drop. Sorry, guys, hate to break it to you. Come back when you're ready to give true answers. I'm tired of your wishy-washy, we don't know business. I just love it. Jesus can drop the burn with the best of them. Just imagine, that'd be great, two truths and a lie. I got burned by Jesus. So yeah, I'm glad I can't say that, hopefully. It's great. It's like a verbal slapstick routine. You kind of start to feel sorry for the poor guys. But this discourse kind of continues for a few days. Jesus teaching and healing the high priests, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, testing him with various questions, walking away, having been humiliated by Jesus. And then finally they've had enough. They're you know what? If this guy's going to make a mockery of us, if he's going to make a mockery of our practices, of our teachings, we are going to exercise our discontent and we're going to have him put to death. Kind of feels like an outlandish response to me. We don't like this guy. Let's kill him. They clearly forgot the commandment, do not murder. 612 commands. They failed at least that one. So 613, I guess that doesn't matter to them anymore. But the one problem with their plan, Jesus was not an ordinary guy. Jesus was not someone making a mockery of their religion. Jesus is God, reestablishing God's true kingdom, reestablishing God's relationship with man, and renewing our ability to communicate with God directly. He's taking down the sacrificial system and replacing it with a relational system. And these guys missed it. These guys missed the mark. They deviated from course. And I'm not saying they were entirely corrupt men leading a nation intentionally astray, but I'm saying they're the product of generations of mistaken, misguided leadership, overconfident in their order of operation, blinded by their tradition, blinded by their rules, and those rules, that tradition, blocked them from seeing the truth, even when the truth was standing right before them, even when the truth was burning them with some verbal satire. So here we are now, approaching Easter, approaching this prized weekend that we in Christendom celebrate with great esteem, and we're unable to celebrate with our traditional traditions. We can't gather for a sunrise service. We can't gather for a sundown tomb service. Those traditions are sidelined this year. So let me instead focus on you, focus on me, focus on us as individuals. How can we view the truth in a new light, unburdened by our traditions? So I'm not saying you neglect every tradition. Join us Friday for our Good Friday service. Join us Sunday for our Easter service. Send the links to your friends. Let them join as well. make your He is Risen Indeed video, but feel free to set aside some of the other, some of the extra, some of those things that we throw in for the fanfare, and say, God, how can I focus on you this week? Say, God, I invite you to flip the table of my heart. I invite you to overturn my internal marketplace, my internal den of robbers. God, I invite you to cleanse me the way you cleansed the temple and prepare me to worship you wholly in spirit, in mind, in body, and just see what he will do. Invite him to unblind us from whatever it is that could be holding us back this year. Fear, worry, anxiety, and say, God, work in me wholly for your glory. So as you meditate on that this week, let me go ahead. Let's wrap us in prayer. If you guys have any prayer requests, feel free to drop in the chat. We'll pass those along to our pastoral team. Otherwise, again, just let us know what are some of your favorite Easter traditions, whether you'll be able to practice them or not this week, and let us know how you're going to embrace that call to be unblinded and to pursue God this week. Lord, I'd love to thank you for just how great you are, how glory-filled you are, for the way that we can just lay down before you and say, Hosanna is the King in the highest, as we can walk alongside you in this parade of glory. But then, God, I pray that we can weep with you as you saw Jerusalem and you had compassion. I pray, Lord, that same compassion for all of us, for Trinity as we worship apart from one another, Lord. Help us have compassion for one another. Help us have compassion for the Cedar Valley. Help us have compassion for the cities, the states, the countries around us in this time of crisis, this time of sorrow, this time of panic and pandemic. I pray, God, that you help us reach those as you reached those in the temple. I pray, God, that you help us have holy discontents. Help us act on them. Help us flip tables when we need to flip tables. Help us overrule changemen when we need to overrule changemen. Free the doves when we need to free the doves, Lord. I pray, God, that you just help us seek you wholly this Easter season. And I pray, God, that reflecting on your resurrection isn't something we do one weekend out of the year, Lord, but rather it just becomes a natural extension of who we are as disciples of Jesus, living and loving among the lost, seeking to reach them for your name, for your kingdom. And help us help others understand, God, that we were enslaved to sin, and until we embrace you, we are not truly free. And God, we're not working with some maniacal, we want more people in our church. We're working with the idea we want more people freed from sin. We want more people freed from the shackles that hold them back. We want more people freed to live the life that you honor us with, Lord, to be blessed deeply by you in this life, and more importantly, the next. And God, I just pray all these things for your name's sake, and great gratitude for what you have done, for you've continued to do. Amen. All right, guys, thanks for joining us. I believe Peter will be back tomorrow looking at the Passover, the plagues, all of that fun, traditional, historical Easter things. And join us again Friday for another morning meditation with Pastor Tony, as well as Friday night for our Good Friday service, and then Sunday for our Easter morning service. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in the chat here on Facebook or YouTube on Friday and Sunday. Thank you very much, and God bless.